Welcome to Wildcide, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
Welcome back, Wildcide.
This is the bizarre world of Freakshows.
That's right. And after this week, guess what it's going to be?
It's gonna be May.
That was good.
Thanks.
That was really good. Yeah. And real quick, before we dive in, we wanted to give a big shout out to Victoria in Texas. She sent us an email that was just like, I love you guys so much. Thank you. You're doing great. And honestly, Victoria, I think we love you even more.
Yeah.
And we're going to send you a nice, thick boy of stickers.
Yeah. Hey, guys, you do know that we have stickers. Like, we can send you guys stickers. We can send you guys a hug with that sticker.
And nothing else, because we can't function past the level of stickers.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. My son was like, didn't you say you guys were getting sweatshirts and hoodies? And I was like, no. I mean, maybe one of these days.
Listen, I have so many.
Yeah. He's like, y'all need to have a sweet merch line.
Yeah,
I was like,
everybody has so many recommendations for us. They're like, y'all should do like actual YouTube videos on YouTube. But I'm like, yeah, these are all really great ideas. And we have literally zero time.
Yeah, I love that for us. So hey, I think it's called like the 5-year plan, right? I mean, we have some goals out there. So
yeah, I mean,
baby steps.
And the thing that I want you guys to know is, please, if you are somebody that fits into the whole true crime interview, reach out to us. Reach out to us. Do you know how much easier our lives would be if people reached out more? Like Sab. Sab was great.
Wow.
Because it's a lot. It's a whole lot. But we're trucking through, and it is that time of the month where we are doing a Shortcide. And so we're going to be diving into the bizarre, just the freakish bizarre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we're tackling the really strange world of carnival shows and freak exhibitions, with society's fascination with the unusual. And I don't want to forget this shout out.
Freudian slip.
The one that I'm going to actually be covering today came from a listener, and she reached out and was just like, oh my gosh, this is wild. Like, I would love to hear you guys cover it. So Hillenaus, here you go, sister girl. This one's for you.
Aww. I love that. And seriously, guys, like, we find stuff interesting, but we're only 2 people. If you guys know stuff that it's like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe this case or this situation, dude, just send it to us.
Send it.
Signed, sealed, delivered. We'll get it to you.
So blind reading, per usual, for our short sides.
Mm-hmm.
And as usual, I'm going to be kind of looking at like some of the psychological stuff. So for like this case that I'm going to be presenting is, I can't help but just think about the psychological component behind this one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but this is my brain. But like, what would you do if you died and your body was turned into a spectacle to display to the world?
I mean, technically, you probably wouldn't care because you would be dead. But like, I get
like knowing it before you died, how would you feel about that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. As far as this week right now is concerned, I'd be like, I don't care. I don't care what you do. I don't care about anything. I don't care about you. So if you were to ask me this week, I'd be like, do it. I don't care. Put my whole body on display. But I think usually, like, if I had time to process it, I'd be like, no, 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 that would be embarrassing for my family, for my kids, for me, you know?
I'd be like, make me look good. Just make me look good. Like, get
Right.
that tape and
Right.
strap it from one shoulder to one butt cheek, from one
That's
hip,
right.
the rib bones, and
That's
just
right.
stack it all back.
That's right. Put me in some sort of burial mask outfit.
Mask.
So yeah. And as always, I love that Bailey always wants to know how people, like think about it and how the brain responds to stuff. I always am so interested in like the collective culture of it,
Yeah.
right? Like, because really, if you think about it, freak shows were all about categorizing people, right? Like putting them in these neat little boxes
No pun
of,
intended.
what was normal and what's not, right? Like, this is not normal if you look into this little tiny box. And I feel like it was a way to make everybody kind of, I don't know, almost feel good about themselves in a weird way. But I think ultimately what it does is it blurs these boundary lines, right? And people who are different, and they get put on display, it's not just fascination really at play anymore. To me, it's control, right? It's exploitation, it's for profit. And I don't know, I'm just really curious to see the case that you picked out and how it's going to fit
Yeah.
into that narrative.
Yeah, so I texted Chelsea one word that said freak show. Well, two words. I said Shortcide freak show. And she was like,
Yay!
she was like, por qué?
Pray tell, Bailey, pray tell.
Okay, the first story is the story of Elmer McCurdy. So if there is not illegal moonshine production in this, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Elmer McCurdy's story is one of the strangest, most bizarre tales you could ever imagine. One that begins with a failed train robbery, continues with his body being put on display across the country for literal decades, and it ends with him finally being laid to rest, right? So Elmer McCurdy, born on January 1st, 1880, to a 17-year-old single mother in the mountains of Oklahoma. Does Oklahoma have mountains?
So, I mean, they have some pretty decent sized hills towards the eastern side of Oklahoma.
To a single mother, the rolling hills of Oklahoma. Elmer's life started under a cloud of uncertainty. His mother never knew who his father was, and it said that as a child, Elmer's rebellious spirit, sullen demeanor, and early troubles seemed to foreshadow the chaos that would follow him throughout his life. And he is the inspiration to Merrill Haggard's Mama Tried song.
Really?
No, but
Oh,
it seems like it would be,
it
right?
seems like it would be. I remember when Grandma Dell was still alive, our great grandmother was alive until she was, like 103. And she talked about like the quote unquote bad rebellious kids in their neighborhood. And they'd wear their hat backwards and they'd walk around with their hands shoved down in their pockets.
Well, Grandma Dell had whiskers. So she is not one to point fingers. Don't throw stones at a glass house. Growing up, Elmer never seemed to find his place in the world. He bounced from job to job. His skill as a plumber, combined with a stint in the lead mines of Missouri and later a short time in the Army, didn't seem to settle him down. The real problem here was his growing addiction to alcohol, which plagued him as he got older. Elmer's life spiraled downward as his reckless drinking combined with his destructive tendencies, traits that would shape his fate in ways that no one could predict. By the early 1900s, Elmer's life of wandering and aimlessness would take a dark turn. He found himself back in Oklahoma, teaming up with a gang of misfits who would become his partners in crime. Elmer, with again his skills in plumbing, mining, and explosives, thought he could put his talents to use in a new venture.
Are we talking about Elmer or my middle school son
Yeah.
with with skills in plumbing, mining, and explosives?
Yeah, no, not sweet little nephew. That we're talking about Elmer and robbery. His first attempt at a train heist was in 1911, but it was a total disaster. So he was too eager to make a big score. Elmer and his crew of misfits used nitroglycerin to blow open a safe. But the explosion was so powerful that it literally destroyed all the money inside, leaving only melted silver coins behind. And so they took off with like barely anything to show for their efforts. Like, I'm pretty sure they probably spent more in the explosives than they got back in the heist.
Don't you know they were so mad?
Yeah.
Dude, I'd have been so mad.
Determined to bounce back, Elmer's crime spree didn't stop there. He tried again with a bank robbery, but again, he went a little overboard on the explosives, which caused more damage to the bank's interior than the actual safe, which actually remained totally untouched. So he blew the bank open, but the safe was untouched. Elmer needed to get it together. And so finally, he and his crew heard of a whopping $400,000 payment being made to the Osage Indian tribe in 1911. This was his chance. This time, Elmer thought he had it all figured out. But when Elmer and his gang attempted to rob the train carrying the payment, they stopped the wrong one.
Like, Elmer, maybe you should stick to plumbing, you know,
Yeah, stick to
or
drinking, man.
yeah, like you're not very good at this, guy.
So the haul, the booty that he walked away with was $46 in cash, some whiskey, and a conductor's watch. It didn't take long for Elmer to get drunk because he was disheartened, and he holed up in a barn on some people's property with stolen booze, waiting for his inevitable capture. And back in the time of the early 1900s, they had posses. Not our mother. Our mother's Instagram account is the posse.
Yeah.
It was like real posses, and the posses were walking around, and a posse found him, and Elmer was like, I'll never be taken alive. Like, I'm going out guns a-blazing, and entered into a full-blown shootout that lasted over an hour before being killed by a single bullet. Elmer McCurdy's life of crime ended with his death, drunk in some random barn, but his afterlife was just beginning. His body was eventually sent to a funeral home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where it was embalmed, which was customary. But no one came forward to claim his remains. Months passed by, and his body sat in the funeral home, pretty much just perfectly preserved. And then one day, a curious observer noticed the remarkable condition of Elmer's corpse, and recognizing the growing local interest in the, quote, embalmed bandit, the funeral home decided to capitalize on it. So they dressed old Elmer up with a rifle in his hand and put him on display for 5 cents a view.
Dude, like, we need to do an episode on the evolution of ethics.
Listen, 5 cents a view.
There you go.
For years, Elmer's body became a macabre tourist attraction, drawing the dark, curious onlookers eager to catch a glimpse of the now infamous outlaw, even though he really sucked at being an outlaw. They didn't put that in the poster. In 1916, 2 carnival promoters arrived at the funeral home posing as Elmer's long-lost brothers. And so with that, they claimed his body, and took him on a cross-country journey with the Great Patterson Carnival Show, where he was now being presented as the outlaw who couldn't be taken alive. And now Elmer, in death, was the star attraction of a sideshow where he traveled from city to city, becoming a part of a super bizarre cultural phenomenon that we now call freak shows or carnivals or circus or whatever.
Right.
Years passed, and by 1922, Elmer's body ended up in the hands of Louis Sonny, a head of an entertainment company in California, after, I don't know if this was politically correct to say carny anymore, but after somebody who worked for a carnival used the body as a collateral for a loan and then defaulted. So this dude displays this mummified bandit as the centerpiece of his museum of crime and toured around the West Coast for decades, until the public's taste for these kind of like gross spectacles kind of started to fade off. After Sonny's death in 1949, Elmer's body was relegated to storage in LA warehouses, eventually forgotten for 20 years. And so by 1968, everybody had kind of forgotten about poor old Elmer McCurdy, and he was sold to the Hollywood Wax Museum and rebranded as the 1,000-Year-Old Man. After the Wax Museum closed later that year, his body was shuffled between various wax dummies and eventually sold to the New Point Amusement Park in Long Beach, California. There, his body was painted fluorescent red and hung from fake gallows, part of the decor in a spooky ride in the Laugh in the Dark funhouse. And it was during the filming of an episode of The $6 Million Man in December of 1976 that everything kind of like unraveled. A crew member, thinking he was moving a dummy, accidentally broke off Elmer's arm, reviewing literal whole-ass human bones beneath.
Well, yeah, because he's an embalmed human.
Yeah, but everybody just thought it was like a wax dummy for all these years.
I have so many questions, right? Like, you literally think that that's a dummy? Like, it's somebody's very best work ever? Like, I've never seen a wax dummy done this well.
I mean, you know, people can be fooled easily. White chicks, everybody was convinced that they were really the white chicks, right?
Brittany and Jessica. I mean, I'm not saying that I would not be bamboozled. Like, I would definitely be the one who's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? But
yeah,
like,
I guess people just don't think that it's like a whole ass embalmed, preserved human mummy. You know what I mean? And so he breaks his arm off and there's bones. And he was like, WTF. So it set off a chain of events, which led to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office examining the body and determining that it was in fact a real human corpse. They were able to later identify it as Elmer McCurdy by the embalming fluid used during the early 1900s, and most specifically by the carnival ticket stubs that had been stuffed in his mouth.
What?
Anytime I think of like dead bodies and things in the mouth, I always think of that scene from Hocus Pocus where Billy cuts his mouth open and he like, and he blows out like 300 years of grossness. Yes. And even since I was little, I remember being like, that has to smell so bad.
Right. Oh, I always think of Silence of the Lamb, like them, like pulling that moth out of the back of that throat.
That's not even that gross to me compared to 300-year-old mummy breath, you know?
Right.
Elmer's body was eventually returned to Oklahoma, where in February of 1977, the city council of Guthrie, again recognizing a chance to promote their town, agreed to bury him in Boot Hill Cemetery along other infamous outlaws. A couple months later, Elmer was finally laid to rest in a simple pine coffin with a 2-foot thick concrete slab poured over his grave to ensure that his strange journey would not continue. So basically, I think it was like the mayor of this town was so concerned with grave robbers coming and digging him back up and like touring him around that they literally poured cement on top of it so he couldn't be stolen again.
And that's so crazy because it was 1977. It's not like it was, again, like 1899 and we had grave robbers rampant.
I know. So, even after Elmer was buried, his legacy continued, influencing popular culture. The story of his bizarre afterlife is thought to have inspired the DC Comics character Jonah Hex. So, Jonah Hex, which I had to look this up because I was like, I don't even know what that is. After he was killed, his body was embalmed and displayed in a traveling circus. So, moving from like one exhibition to another. Before being discovered by historians, much like Elmer McCurdy. Elmer McCurdy's life was filled with failure, misfortune, and an endless string of bad decisions. Yet in death, he became part of a story far stranger than most could ever imagine. His body, once treated as a mere freak sideshow attraction, has become a testament to the bizarre journey of an outlaw who could never escape his past, even in the afterlife. And that is, my dear friends, the super bizarre story of Elmer McCurdy. Wild, right?
It really is. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I can kind of understand people's fascination with different stuff. I mean, like, I don't know, people go to wax museums and stuff like that, and they think that that's cool. But I just want to understand what people were doing back in that time where they were paying literal money to see, like bearded ladies and Siamese twins, right? Like, and they were just like, oh, it's so crazy. It's so freakish.
But it was, right? Like, you didn't see, they were rarities. You didn't see that kind of stuff. You didn't have social media. You didn't really have, you didn't have TV for the longest time. And so traveling freak shows was the only way that you were exposed to these weird kind of outliers of the world. So from that perspective, I get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I mean, I was like 4 years old and I was obsessed with going to Memphis to dig up Elvis Presley because I wanted to see his bones.
Oh, that's true. I do remember that. Yeah, you were hell-bent on finding them bones. Like,
I just wanted to see his bones.
I know.
So it's always been like, I think, just super, super, fascinating for everybody. Morbid fascination.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's just weird to me how, again, I just feel like the mistreatment, because sure, later on in the game, they didn't know that it was a real body, but at the beginning of this thing, like, they knew it was a real body. And the fact that there's just like blatant disregard, like, we're going to exploit somebody who literally can't like defend themselves.
And this is going to be a super unpopular opinion, and I'm sure everybody's going to hit unsubscribe, and that's okay. But like, he was kind of a dirtbag, like he was kind of a douche canoe. So like, I'm not super mad at it because, you know what I mean? Like, he probably did more good and death being exploited than him robbing trains and blowing things up. You know what I mean? I don't know, whatever.
No, I get it. I do get it. It's, that's where the unsubscribing comes from. People are like, it's the principle of it. It's just human exploitation and human capitalism and
blah, blah, blah. We would all do it if we weren't held to such strict societal norms right now.
Oh, I know. Dude, that really, that's insane. But on the other hand, we're going to continue in the world of sideshow acts and even more exploitation. And I think you guys are going to love this.
I know, I'm excited to see what you found.
It is another bizarre tale of essentially being treated as something you're not, right? But this time it's a different kind of spectacle.
All
So
right.
I'm excited to see how you guys react to this one.
Yeah.
So in my case, we have a woman named Julia Pastrana, and she lived her life as one of the most famous freak show acts of her time. But she had to survive an entirely different way, right? Like constantly fighting not just for survival, but for her humanity.
No, Chelsea's gonna pull on like the ethics heartstrings. I'm just like, he was dirtbag. That's normal. And you're like, oh, look at the poor exploitation.
I feel like it needs to be explored a little bit. And
Sure.
I feel like Julia's story, it just screams at how we view differences, right? And how, unfortunately, gender plays into it.
Okay.
And it's one thing to be othered, right? But being a woman who doesn't meet the beauty standards,
Yeah.
that kind of makes things a little bit more complicated, right?
It's gonna get me in my feels.
I know. So, and it is really fascinating how her story is like Elmer's in some ways, but also so different because it's all about how society dehumanizes and commodifies women's bodies.
Ooh,
So,
okay. Let's
yeah.
hear it.
Okay. Well, we are back in the 1800s, and I hope most of you guys are starting to understand that I love this time, and especially in the US. Like, give me all the Gilded Age, right? And I know that's slightly before the Gilded Age, but I just really love this time. So in 1834, high in the rugged mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico, a child was born who would become one of the most tragic and misunderstood figures of the 19th century. And her name was Julia Pastrana. And from the moment she entered the world, her life would be marked by both fascination and, unfortunately, exploitation. So she was born with this super rare condition known as hypertrichosis, and her face and body was covered in this thick black hair.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've seen some examples of this and some historic pictures of this, but when I say that her body, like face and all, was covered in thick black hair, I mean like literally, was literally covered. So her features were also unusual. She had these larger ears, right? I mean, human looking ears, but larger ears, a very, very pronounced nose, and really thick lips. And of course, this only added to her striking kind of otherworldly appearance. And to those who saw her, she seemed more a creature of legend than a human being.
Yeah, I could understand that, especially at that time.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like even in today's society, right? Like I think that would be a hard one, even for just if you were at Walmart type of thing, for people not being tempted to stare. So Julia's mother was, again, a young 17-year-old woman. And I mean, rightly so, she feared the worst. In a time and place where folklore often provided explanation for the unexplained, many believed her daughter's deformities were the result of, I'm sure you all guessed it, some supernatural force.
Yeah.
Some whispered that Julia had been cursed by the Nauli, which is this shape-shifting werewolf from local legends, while others in nearby villages simply referred to her as, quote, wolf woman due to the wolf-like features that she had been born with. And, despite these eerie rumors, Julia's early years were shrouded in mystery and hardship. And of course, she and her mother struggled to survive in isolation, right? Like, I really can't even imagine.
Yeah.
When Julia was just 2 years old, fortune, or I don't know, I think I would better say misfortune, would intervene. A group of Mexican herders searching for a lost cow found Julia and her mother hiding in a cave. The herders took them to the nearest town where Julia was placed in an orphanage. Despite her unusual appearance, Julia proved to be not just intelligent, but also sweet-natured, quickly becoming a local curiosity. Word of her existence spread, eventually reaching the governor of Sinaloa, which, instead of offering her a life of care, chose to adopt her.
Oh, look at that.
I know. And she became a live-in maid, treated as, I know.
Oh,
Not yet. Hold on. Yeah. Treated as little more than an amusement for the governor and his guests.
I don't like that. I pulled a Chelsea. I was like, oh, that's so sweet before the real information came out.
I know. This always makes me think of that poem, that Edgar Allan Poe poem that we had to read in Miss Lovelace's class called like Hop Frog, or do you remember?
Oh, I always knew Annabelle Lee. That was the one I memorized.
No, this one was the poem of like the court jester who was from like dwarfism.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just always think of that. By the time she turned 20, Julia longed to return to her roots and the life she had been torn from. But fate would intervene once again when she crossed paths with an American showman named M. Rates. He convinced her to leave behind her dreams of home and join the world of traveling sideshows. This moment marked the beginning of her transformation into one of the most famous, quote, human curiosities of the 19th century, a title she would wear until her death. So it's December 1854, right? And Julia debuts at New York City's Gothic Hall, where she performed dressed in a red gown. She sang Spanish folk songs, danced the Highland fling, and captivated the audience with her charm and intelligence. But the crowds weren't there for her talents. They came to see her for her appearance. Advertised as, are you ready for this one? The Bear Woman from the wilds of Mexico.
God, that sounds like such a freak show, like poster.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Step right up for only 5 cents. You can pretty much
see a bear in the wilds of Mexico.
The trauma that this poor person is having to endure. Julia's image was solidified in the public's mind as the ape woman, the baboon lady, and a myriad of other grotesque ladies.
Yeah.
Under the management of her new husband,
all right,
there we go, Theodore Lent, who recognized the financial opportunity.
I'm like, oh, Theodore. Aw. And then you're like, who just wanted to get money from her.
Who just wanted to exploit her.
Oh, it's so awful.
I know.
We should have started this one. What a stick in the mud. Like, what a way to rain on the parade.
I know. But with Theodore Lent's help, Julia's career did skyrocket.
Ugh.
I don't know, right? They toured America and Europe, where she performed under several stage names. and Julia was marketed as a hybrid of human and animal. So now some doctors, including Alexander B. Mott, even claimed she was the product of a human and an orangutan mating.
Oh
gosh. I can't. These sensationalized stories played into the public's fear and fascination with the idea of a human-ape hybrid, reinforcing deep-seated societal beliefs about race and primal instincts. While Julia's life on stage became the spectacle, her personal life was one of isolation and exploitation. Although she formed a bond with actress Friederike Gossman, who saw beyond her, quote, freak persona, Julia's true feelings for Lent remained unclear. Was her devotion to him born from love, or was it the result of the emotional imprisonment her life had thrust upon her? Despite the complicated relationship, Julia continued to perform across the globe, and in 1859, while touring in Moscow, Julia discovered she was
pregnant.
Well,
if you tell me that, like, she loses the baby and dies in childbirth, I quit.
No, she doesn't. I wouldn't do that to you. In March 1860, she gave birth to a son, a healthy baby boy, who was covered in hair with a pronounced jaw. So she had passed the gene down to her son. For a brief moment, Julia felt a joy that had long eluded her, but tragedy struck quickly.
Chelsea?
The baby lived only 35 hours before succumbing to illness, and just days later, Julia died from complications during childbirth.
You're a dirty liar.
I'm sorry, but she didn't die like during childbirth. Like, she did deliver him, but
this is awful.
Well, even in death, Julia's exploitation did not cease. Lent, husband Lent, seeing an opportunity to profit from her remains, made arrangements with Professor Sokolov, a Russian autonomist, to have both Julia and her son's bodies preserved.
No.
But this was no simple mummification. Julia's body was taxidermied, which means stuffed.
I know what taxidermy means. This is gross.
And posed for public display as though she were still alive. Lent took their preserved remains and toured them through Europe and the United States, continuing to capitalize on Julia's body even after death. For decades, Julia's remains were passed from one owner to the next, displayed in freak shows, museums, and circuses. In the 1920s, her body was sold to a Norwegian carnival owner, Hakon Lund, who exhibited her as part of a, quote, hygienic and anatomical exhibition.
This is the worst.
I know. By this time, however, public opinion about such displays was beginning to shift, and after World War II, the exhibitions faded into obscurity. But in the 1970s, Julia's body was rediscovered in a storage facility in Norway, and her tragic legacy was reignited. Activists and journalists began calling for Julia's repatriation, and in 2005, artist Laura Anderson Barbata led a campaign to return her body to Mexico.
That's right, Laura. Yes.
Thank you.
So I had to look it up. Repatriation is the return of someone to their own country. So I never even knew that that was a word. So I learned something new.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Laura,
And
awesome.
yep. In 2013, nearly 150 years after her death, Julia Pastrana was finally returned to her homeland in Sinaloa de Leyva, Mexico. She was laid to rest with the dignity she had been denied in her life, her coffin adorned with white roses. Hundreds gathered to witness her Catholic funeral, a moment of closure for a woman who had spent her life as a sideshow spectacle, her humanity stripped away.
Oh.
So, Julia's journey, filled with suffering, exploitation, and loss, had taken her across the world, but in the end, she was remembered not as a freak show, but as a woman who, despite being treated as less than human, showed grace, intelligence, and resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty. In death, as in life, Julia Pastrana finally found the peace she had long been denied. And her story serves as a poignant reminder that behind every spectacle, remember this, guys, is a person with their own story, their own dreams, and their own humanity.
You're fired.
I know. I'm sorry.
This was terrible.
But it's a great reminder. It's still relevant today. Like we might not have traveling carnivals anymore, or not of that kind, right?
Yeah.
But I still think that we need to stop and remember in society that, people are people and they have dreams and they're humans. And I know that I'm such a bleeding heart on things like that, but it's hard to feel like you're different, right? Well,
sure.
In any season.
Yeah, I mean,
it's hard to feel like you're only viewed as, one thing.
Well, and I imagine, like, on average, everybody has felt different or less than in some capacity of their life.
Sure.
And I don't know if many people have experienced that level of being ostracized by like the whole community. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like how awful that must have been. And oh my gosh, and you were like, and then, douchebag Lint, whatever her husband's name was, came along, and I was like, oh, he saw her for her. She loves me for me. And then you were like, nope, it's just to get his hands on some dirty money.
Yeah. No, I know.
Whatever. He's the worst.
But again, I know that you guys hate that I always take it to a serious note, but we have a student who he was born with the condition called EEC syndrome, or ectrodactyly syndrome, and it's where your hands, they have a really pronounced split down the middle of them, and your fingers are usually fused, so you usually end up having, right, like essentially like 3 fingers. And those individuals at one point were very, very common in these traveling freak shows, right? And they would call him like Lobster Boy, come see Lobster Boy on display. And it's a genetic, deformity. And we have a student that he was born with that. And it really makes me wonder, do we talk enough about some of these really rare outliers? How do we train our minds for viewing people, again, not defined by their deformity, right? Or their very unique characteristic, but how do we look at them as humans?
I mean, yeah. I always take the approach, like anytime that I have a client who has some sort of like deformity, I'll just ask them.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just like literally be like, hey, I noticed that, like you have a little bit of a cross eye. Do you mind me asking what happened with that?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll tell me, and I'll be like, does it bother you? Because, you know, obviously people can notice it, right? I would be insulting you if I acted like it wasn't there. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yes.
And they would just be like, yeah, I mean, it does bother me. You know, people notice it and I'm very insecure about it. And then we just tackle it from that angle. But that's one of the first things I do is, I mean, obviously not as soon as they walk in and I'm like, oh, you know, what's that?
Sure.
But like during the assessment, you know, it obviously comes up and I'll just be like,
Yeah.
you know, how does this speech impediment or this deformity, how does it affect you?
Yeah.
And I just kind of talk about it like the color of their hair, you know what I
Sure.
mean? But obviously take it more serious than just like, oh, it's fine, you know, like we're all equal, hee hee, you know,
Right.
write some affirmations and we'll be good. It's much more psychological and trauma packed than that. So, but yeah, I think it starts with just being polite and inquiring out of a place of like warmth and curiosity than just like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I love that because I had a patient one time and they believe that the issues, the congenial, the genetic, what am I trying to say? Congenital. The congenital issues that she has, they think was a byproduct of her dad being exposed to Agent Orange during
Oh, yeah,
during
yeah.
Vietnam. And she just had lots of very interesting, I remember like her pupils were not in the shape of a circle. They were almost like an ink splatter. Like they had this
Yeah.
very interesting margin to them. And same thing, it was one of those like, you know, I hope you don't mind me asking, but would you like to talk about, you know, your eyes? Like, do you mind if I ask you about your pupils? And she was great. I mean, she was just like, no, 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 no. Yeah, it's a really kind of an interesting thing. They're doing a lot of research on it. They don't really know, right? They think that Agent Orange was involved. We should do a case on Agent Orange. That stuff was wild.
We should do a short side on like the bizarre war crimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For reals. We really should. Because that,
Oh, and you guys should really send us short side recommendations.
yes. So if you guys have any, you know, Agent Orange, any just general war crimes, or just any, you know, any unrelated short sides topics, yeah, send them our way. Because that's one thing that Bailey and I don't run out of is we don't run out of curiosity for this stuff.
For sure.
So
Yeah. Well, what a weird flex. Am I right? These people
yeah.
being like, come and look at like my weird, you know, like my freaky attraction. Well, yeah, you want to see my weird freaky attraction? Like, what a weird flex.
I know. It's so true. But
Well, as always, thanks for hanging out with us through this carny weird ride.
and we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.